So MC, I'm not gonna lie, there's a little part of me that wants to do this on an Instagram live because um, of the corrective experience. That story of me getting hit by a motorcycle and then
Mm,
coming back to the
yeah,
scene and
yeah.
doing. I feel a little bit of that, uh, and I just want to insert real quick for you, MC, as well as people listening, if they don't know. Um, Disclaimer about my podcast: it's assembly is required, meaning the listener has to put some of our our conversations together, and so
I love
um,
it.
they will hopefully understand what we're talking about because we're going to get there this time. But yeah, and then I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? You're making it about you again. What if it crashes like the last time, and now
Mm,
you can't do it twice to someone. Um, but
mm.
here we are, and I'm actually um, glad that we're doing it this way.
Me too. I
We're
like the
gonna
assembly required. For some reason, I thought you meant like some political assembly, and I was like, "What, John, are you
no,
talking
no,
about?"
talking about. I'm talking about nonlinear. I'm talking about
In a
you know,
nonlinear way. Yeah.
yeah. 3 questions I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
And for people who are like, well, who the fuck is this guest? We're going to get to it. It doesn't feel, I want to slow down. I want to slow down and we're going to get to all of that. We're
Yeah. Yeah.
going to go deeper. Okay. Number one, this is called fill in the blanks.
Okay.
I wish I could stop my pattern of.
Overworking,
Oh, okay.
which I know that sounds like a cop out, but it really is a serious problem that I've really been digging in and trying to figure out for many years. And I've gotten a lot better, but I can't
Yeah.
figure it out. So yeah.
If I could go back in time, I would
Wait,
change.
what about you?
This is an interview. This is me
You
interviewing
don't.
you.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't get to hit the ball back.
There's no reciprocity, right?
When we start talking, you can. If I could go back in time, I would change.
Oh man. Um, the first thing that comes up, and I'm not sure why, is my mom's like last year of life. I think I would have just quit my
Mm,
job and been around her more.
yeah, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
My new definition of love is.
Oh, um, when you can feel at peace around somebody else.
Ooh, I love it. I love it's simple but potent.
Yeah.
Um, my guest today, I'm super excited about, is someone who goes way back. I would say 12 years back, maybe, perhaps. We met on the internet when most people were on dial-up, and I was blogging on a platform called Tumblr.
I miss Tumblr.
I do miss it a little bit. I think maybe it will come back, kind of like Atari or retro,
Yeah, yeah.
like it becomes vintage because it's still up there, just no
Still
one
there.
uses it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah. um, MC McDonald is a professor. She has more letters after her name than me. She's a doctor. She's been studying trauma for the last 7 years ish.
14.
Oh, sorry. 14
The only
years.
reason I know that off the top of my head is because we couldn't do the math the other day and we had to both get calculators.
Oh,
So,
that's right. 14 years studying trauma.
mhm.
And she has a brand new book out. I'm super proud of her. It's called Unbroken. And if you are listening, well, of course you're listening. This is going to be a treat. You're going to, your mind's going to be blown because we're going to do a deep dive on trauma. We're going to flip it on its head. We're going to redefine it. We're going to do a lot of things with that topic. And then, of course, get to know MC as we're doing that.
Yes.
What else do? You have a full practice. What else do you? Because we know you are overworked.
I'm overworked. So I teach, but this is the problem is that I like a lot of things. I teach college for 2 different universities. And I teach at the TAT Lab 3 times a week, and I have a full practice. And I'm also, I guess, an author.
Take out the I guess. Repeat the last sentence without the I guess.
And I'm an author.
Yes. Not the first time she's been published because she's also written textbooks. right?
Mhm. Yeah, I have
Uh,
two other yeah, two books on trauma that are priced like textbooks. I kind of tried
yes.
to go rogue in academia,
Yeah,
which
and
doesn't.
she finally did go rogue. She hopped the fence, and now she has a book that is going to go wide. Um, I can't wait for you to walk into the Barnes and Noble or any bookstore and
Yeah.
see your book. It's a for me that's the kind of the watery eyed experience. When you get the box of books and you get to hold it in your hand, that's really
Mhm.
cool too. A lot of times people cry,
Yeah.
but for me it was going to the bookstore and seeing it on the shelf that really did it for me.
Seeing the cover was a moment for sure. Like
Yeah.
seeing what the cover art looked like, but I can't even imagine the intensity of seeing it in the store. Like what?
Yeah, it's gonna be great. Um, not to, not to change the tone, but we're gonna go off the deep end just a little bit. Uh,
Mhm.
Speaking of trauma, 3 traumatic moments or events in your life. Number 1 would be.
The death of my father was the
Mm.
biggest trauma that I had
And how old
in
were you when
2000.
that happened?
I was 24. I had just turned 24, like 2 months
Wow.
before. Yeah.
And how did that event ripple into your life? How did that shape you?
It's funny, like I think this is important to say about really shocking grief too, like trauma and traumatic loss. It didn't really hit me for a couple of months.
Hmm.
So it was actually June of 2006, about 6 months later, when I just absolutely like, I don't even know. Like, I don't want to casually use the phrase lost my mind, but it really shattered everything. And I just
Sure.
became sort of like a puddle of anxiety. Because I kind of realized it just hit me then. And I realized that nothing that I previously believed about the world was true. And I didn't even know that I believed things. Like, I was studying psychoanalysis and philosophy, and I thought I was an adult
Hmm.
and was, alternative and new things. And I was actually studying grief and mourning and Freud right before it happened. So I think I thought I knew a thing. And I feel like every time that happens, the universe is like, oh, sweetie.
Yeah, let's pull the rug underneath
Yeah,
you.
you don't know a thing.
So, what would be one takeaway from that event? Not
um,
takeaways in what you've learned. I mean, it can be what you learned, but what was the secondary change? What was the change that that isn't reversible or wasn't reversible? There's a permanence to this because of that event.
oh yeah, I mean, I don't even know who I would be if it hadn't been for that loss and everything that I learned after. And that's not to like candy coat it. It was awful.
Hmm.
All the learning was awful, and I would trade everything for 10 minutes back with my dad.
Oh man,
Such an important person in my life.
yeah. I can't imagine. Also at 24, and
Yeah.
you guys were close.
Yeah, and you still, or maybe I shouldn't say universally, I still needed him. You know what I mean? Like there've been many,
Yeah.
many times in my life, even recently, where I'm just like, oh man, I want to talk to my dad. But I think the thing that changed the most was that I was really forced to come face to face with the anxiety that I've been struggling with for my whole life and
Which is
figure
what?
out I have panic disorder
Hmm.
and OCD, and I had had these kind of slapped together band-aid sort of fixes on those things, and they didn't work anymore. None of my coping mechanisms worked. Actually, I wanted to call the introduction of the book this got changed, but I wanted to call it Xanax and jumping jacks, because those were
Oh,
truly the only two coping mechanisms that I had in the world.
that's a great
And when they
title.
didn't work, I know,
Yeah.
right? And it rhymes and the whole thing. But yeah, so I mean, I think having to face that and really go deep and figure out a different way to be in the world. But yeah, it really kind of tore apart the fabric of the universe for me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
used to believe that like if you were a good person, that bad things couldn't happen to you. And my dad was
Right.
like the best person. So the fact that it happened, it really made me rethink everything and resituate myself.
I'm thinking about a few things as you're telling the story. One, a little jealous. Your dad seemed like a really wonderful person, but also your relationship with him. It just I'm jealous of that because my dad is also no longer here. But I didn't get to know him on that level. I also I speak broken Korean. He speaks broken English. So it's like we couldn't have,
Yeah.
long, deep conversations. He just worked a lot. And
Mm,
he was kind of funny. He was a little bit inappropriate. He was also an alcoholic. But the images I see, you and your dad at a coffee shop talking about life, or
yeah.
sitting on a brick wall, like those kind of, I was gonna say Kodak moments, but that really dates me. I think that was commercials in the 80s.
So it's
But like,
back now, coming back. They know about Kodak again. You're good.
oh yeah, it's back in style. But man, so I guess I'll just say that how lucky you were.
Oh, for sure.
We do live
And
in
I
a
was gonna,
fatherless nation.
we do. Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot on Father's Day. I had a job recently where I was working with previously incarcerated gang members,
Hmm.
and that was
Yeah,
so much more. I already knew that, but it was made so much more vivid.
yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I wish you could have met him. He would love you. That he would have freaked out. He would have been like calling you on the phone and being like, John, I noticed that yesterday you had 2 million followers and today you have 2.5 million, whatever. Like, what do you make of that? And how do you do, he was just so like infinitely interested in people and like
Yeah.
just made you feel like the sun was shining on you. You know what I mean? He used to pick me up at the train station in New York. I grew up in Western Mass. And so
Hmm.
I would take the train to New Haven and then he would pick me up and we'd drive the rest of the way and have just these super like deep conversations.
So
It's
the last thing this does for me, and we're gonna move on, is it makes me, because I'm a father now. It makes me
yeah,
want to be like that. It
yeah,
reminds me to be present with my daughter, and actually engage, and
yeah.
and that life is precious. So great
It
reminder.
is so important.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you know that, but yeah.
Traumatic event number 2 in your life.
The death of my mom she just made it just 2 years after. So she died in 2008 in
So,
February.
speaking of the universe pulling rugs,
Yeah, yeah. And that was
what was it?
confusing.
Yeah.
I think actually the second traumatic thing, I'm going to change my answer. The second traumatic thing was finding out that my parents were very different. And my mom was like kind of I call her a benevolent terrorist, which if you
Mm.
knew her, you know exactly what I mean. Um, and if you're offended, that's your problem. She was a force of nature.
In what
And
way? In what
in
way?
all the ways. Like she was in control, she was brutal sometimes, she could make you feel like nothing
Mm.
with a look. Like she was just like firepower. And she
Wow.
was completely operating out of fear, but we didn't know that growing up. We just knew
Right.
that she was the the center of the universe. Like she was the law and the discipline and everything. And then when my dad died, my dad was the total opposite.
Hmm.
Not that he never disciplined or anything like that or never got mad, but he was so like kind of like, she used to call him this, there were 6 kids in my family, the seventh kid, because he was so playful and like
Mm.
very counter to her. And so
Wow.
when
Wait,
he,
you have 5 other siblings?
yeah, yep,
Wow, I didn't know that. This is
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Where do you
Um,
fall in position?
Catholic family. I'm the fifth, so I'm the second youngest.
Wow. Unbelievable. Okay.
Yeah. But so I think seeing that she couldn't like really, she was trying so hard, but she couldn't live without my dad was really shocking because then she became a lot less powerful, and it was
Right.
like, has this all been like the kind of the Wizard of Oz, the wizard behind the curtain? Like you're all sound
Oh.
and fury, but there's not like, who are you even?
Yeah, and also you witnessed her dependency, or
Totally. Yeah.
saw that
Yeah.
well, also you just saw that she was human,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. All everybody, falls at some point. But then when she died, it was like a re-rupture of the universe because in a way the universe started making sense again because she was like
Yeah.
back with my dad. But
Right.
there was kind of a cascade of events after her death where that kind of really splintered us siblings. And so we went from feeling like this big unified, group to kind of just random people scattered. So
Mm.
it was like within a couple of months, it was like we lost our house, we sold it. So we lost our like childhood home and all the stuff and all of us were just sort of scattered. And it was just like, what the fuck happened?
Yeah, so it's like nothing changes life faster than death or birth, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
um
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were 27 or you were under 30 and you had now
Yeah.
just lost both your parents.
Yeah, I think I was 26 when my mom died. Yeah, and I had
Wow.
just lost both my parents, and no one else I knew had had like I was working with people who were 20 and 25 and 30 years older than me,
Hmm.
who because I had a job in HR at the time when I was in grad school, and none of them, like no one, some people, one or two people that I knew had lost a parent,
Right.
but no one had lost both, and no one at my age at all. And so it was like you're kind of on your own, and people um as well-meaning as they are, we're kind of like, okay, like, are you over it yet? Like, what, like,
Yeah.
when are you going to come back to life? And so it's
Did it
just, you
make you
can't go on.
feel very alone?
Totally,
Yeah. Now,
totally.
were those events one of the reasons why you started studying trauma, or no, not yet?
No, I already was. And then when I
Oh,
started studying trauma, so I was studying mourning and grief and kind of traumatic losses. I was looking at really sudden losses of children actually. And, and then I started working on identity, and I wanted to look at things that rupture identity. And so I kind of reached for trauma as like a case, like, a proof, like
hmm,
that identity can be shattered. And I was looking at combat veterans. So I didn't really see the connection
right.
between myself and my research for like an embarrassing amount of time.
Hmm.
Like, yeah.
So, event number 3 in your life.
Divorce.
Yeah, obviously that's one for me as well. How did your
Shocking,
divorce? What's that?
painful. I was just gonna say shockingly painful. Like, I don't
But
think
very
we've had.
different. I feel like your divorce and my divorce were very different in that mine was very fast and
Yeah,
sudden and kind of
yeah,
like um, quick.
yeah,
Yours more dragged out.
yeah. Years. Yep.
Yeah.
But just the crumbling of a thing that I had after my mom died. I really had sworn off marriage because I was like,
Mm,
I'm not doing that. Like, that took my mom. You know what I mean? She's the most powerful force in the entire universe, and like that loss of a spouse took her out. So
right.
like, fuck that, because so many people afterwards were like, oh, it's so beautiful, which like it is and it isn't, right? It was the worst thing to say at the moment, but it's also true, which is such a funny thing with grief. Like, people say the worst possible thing at the worst possible moment. But I had sworn off marriage. I was like, I'm simply not doing that. Like, there's no way. And then when I got married, I really felt like I had kind of conquered that fear in myself or something. I don't know, really. So to see that unravel and to lose someone without them dying was really shocking to me, because I
Yeah.
have had other losses. I had a boyfriend who died. And so I've had a lot of loss, and I kind of thought the only thing we had to worry about was death.
But
And
now death has been around you a
yeah,
lot, and so uh,
yeah. And you can lose in other ways. Like, somebody can disappear when they're standing right next to you, like,
right, right.
and they're still there, but they're not. And so, yeah, so that was painful in a way that was really unexpected, and again just kind of took me out. Do you feel like yours, because it was fast, like, do you feel like that's easier? That's kind of a terrible question.
Yes. No, it's not. It's like I hate to I hate to use this example, but it's like a wounded animal on the side of the road, and it's
Yeah,
sometimes better to put the animal out of its misery,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
For
I was thinking
you,
about ripping the band-aid off, but yeah.
what's that?
I was thinking about ripping the band-aid off.
Yeah. Um, exactly. Yeah. For me, it was it was also because I put her on a pedestal. I didn't have any friends. Like, she was the sun I kind of revolved around. Around. I was my identity, and the whole thing came crashing. She wanted a separation, and then that separation turned into a divorce very fast. I think she wanted a divorce, but she was scared to say divorce, so
Yeah,
she planted as, "Hey, we're just gonna separate. Maybe we'll get married again. Let's just do it, just to, and then we'll start over." And then, of
yeah,
course, I'm on Craigslist looking for a new place to live.
yeah,
But at the same time, yes, traumatic, but also one of the biggest, I would say the biggest catalyst in my life that repositioned me and forced me to my hero's journey. I mean, everything happened because of that incident, you know?
Yeah, yeah. That's wild. Think
Yeah.
about like what your life would be like if that hadn't happened, you know?
I would be tucking my shirt in, and I would be miserable. I think I would be going, because I was already studying to become a therapist, but I think I would just be, wearing the wrinkle-free pants and going into the nondescript rooms and being a quote
Awkward.
unquote therapist. Yeah, the
Yeah.
divorce is what chopped me at the knees, and I had to do some soul searching, and yeah. So let's start with your definition of trauma,
Okay.
because I think it's so good.
Unbearable emotional experience that lacks relational home.
Yes. And so far, we've talked about very big life events, which
Yes.
of course
Yeah.
can be traumatic, but things that happen daily can be traumatic,
A
correct?
thousand
And this
percent.
is a
Yeah.
misconception.
Yeah, completely. I was just talking to a client the other day about a moment when she was in a school environment. She was really young and she kind of thought, even at that young age, that the only value that she had was like her intelligence. You know,
Mm,
she's like fourth grade or something like that, but she's already trying to kind of put herself in the social order. And she's like, I'm the smart one. And she had
wow.
this teacher that year that continuously shut her down, like, and
Oh,
kind of in a mean way that probably wouldn't be acceptable these days because
right.
teaching has changed a lot. But back then it was like, let somebody else talk and you're being a hog and kind of making fun of her a little bit. And she struggled with that kind of underneath everything for her whole life. And part of the reason is because since we don't look at those little events as traumatic, we don't legitimize them, then we don't look at them. And then we don't
Yeah.
see how they're shaping our behavior in our lives, you know?
I almost feel like the little events that are traumatic actually can be more damaging or dangerous because we don't
Yeah.
file them as traumatic. The big things we do, you know what? It's like being in an abusive relationship. I always say that
It's just thinking that. Yeah, yeah,
if it's obvious abuse, if it's physical abuse, right? It's abuse,
yeah.
and eventually you're gonna make your escape plan or whatever. But if it's like this kind of subtle, maybe
Mhm.
gaslighting, it could go on for years, and
Yeah.
it could really make you, think you're less than or defective or crazy or all of those things. So.
Oh yeah. Slowly like erode your whole sense of self. I actually just heard Terry Real say that the research shows, so come for him, not me,
Mhm.
that the research shows that when they look at people who've been in physically abusive relationships that are also emotionally abusive, that those survivors say that they would prefer the physical violence over the emotional violence
Sure,
because of
sure.
exactly what you just said, because it's so hard to point out and look at. It's hard to find the wound. Where's the bruise? How do I fix it?
Yeah, I mean, going back to both of our divorces, it's like I feel like the physical violence is because it's sudden, it's quick,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's obvious. But the other one, the slow burn, the
yeah.
confusion, the emotional roller coaster, that's
Lack of
much harder.
clarity. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so going back to trauma and how I think we all have trauma in our lives, and I think this is why your book is so important. And
Mhm.
most people think trauma, as in sexual abuse or war,
Yeah.
but trauma can be anything that, like you says, lacks a relational home.
Completely. Anything that's overwhelming enough to kind of alter the way that your normal functioning is happening in your brain and body can become a lasting trauma. And that's going to be different for you based on different moments of your life and what your capacity is and what your social support network looks like. And it's also the case that lots of people go to war and they don't have trauma.
Right,
Lots of
right. So two
people go
people
through
could have the same experience, but for one
exactly.
person it could be traumatic, and the other person it may not be. Um,
Right. So what I like about the unbearability thing is that it's the person who lives through it that gets to be like, oh, that was unbearable and this wasn't.
right.
But unbearable is high enough a bar to not let us get to say that like absolutely anything is ridiculous, you know? I
Yes.
mean, that anything is traumatic because that can get ridiculous.
So, how does that affect us when we experience trauma on whichever level? How does that affect us? Because I think a lot of people also minimize, so they never seek help because they're
Yeah.
like, whatever. I'm fine. I'm not
Yeah.
um, whatever. I'm not suffering.
I'm not affected, or
I'm not
yeah, totally.
affected. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things is that we don't really understand like how adaptive our biology is. Like we are these brilliant machines moving through the world and constantly adapting appropriately to internal stuff and external stuff.
Right. Right.
And so we need those systems to be working. And when we have anything that's sufficiently overwhelming that those systems get thrown out of whack, which they're supposed to do, right? Which I can explain in a second, that is potentially traumatic. And if you don't go back to sort of your baseline quick enough and process that in a safe place, then you get stuck in overdrive. And that starts to change everything, the way you appear in the world, what you believe about yourself, like what your horizon completely changes and your life can get really small.
I like what you said, because I'm such a visual person. Stuck in overdrive.
Yeah. Because our
So
systems, oh, go
would
ahead.
that look different for the individual? What are some broad strokes? What are some examples on what that would look like stuck in overdrive?
So we're designed to kind of toggle back between like overdrive and then I don't know what the opposite of overdrive is. Drive?
Neutral,
Neutral. Okay.
first gear, yeah,
So
downshifting.
yeah, so you're designed to be able to downshift. And if you
Hmm.
get stuck in overdrive, it's like, you know, when you watch a scary movie and like you get a little jumpy and
Yeah,
you
you're
kind of,
like that all the time.
yeah, totally. But
Yeah.
this would be like if you get stuck there, so that imagine if you're moving through the world and you're just trying to like get to work or get to the coffee shop, you get in the
Mhm.
car and every noise that you hear puts you on, you're already on edge. And so then
Right.
every noise that you hear, you know, tips over into extreme anxiety or irritability or rage. And then by the time it's lunchtime, like you look like you're living a normal life to everybody else, but internally you're like burnt and exhausted because
Yeah.
you're, you know, in a different situation. You're in overdrive and everyone else is in first. Does that make sense? Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like this is the majority,
Yeah.
you know?
What do you mean? Like most people are in overdrive?
Yeah, I think most people
Right
are.
now, for sure. Because we are, this is the thing. Like someone the other day was like, why do you think people are like so angry all the time right now? Because people are doing crazy shit, right? They're like
Yeah,
screaming
yeah,
at Starbucks and getting out of their cars and screaming
right.
at each other in traffic and stuff like that. We do not have coping mechanisms and techniques. We learned that day one of the pandemic. And now we've
Mhm.
been living through that for 2.5 years. Like, of course, we've been in overdrive because like our lives are in danger.
Well, so if you're alive, you just based on the last 2.5 years,
Yeah.
you've experienced trauma,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
And that's not even to touch like any of the financial stuff or the political
right,
stuff that's
right.
going
All
on.
the marriages that are crumbling because
Yep.
of the pandemic, inflation, guess all the stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah, totally.
i- if
Yeah.
you invested in crypto, chances are you've had some trauma recently. Um, so let's talk about if you know that you've had some trauma in your life, and
Mhm.
you realize that it is impacting you. You realize that you're stuck in overdrive. There's anxiety. Maybe you're very reactive. You know, all the
Yeah.
ways that it can kind of ripple. What are some steps? Because you talk about processing, and just to bring
Yeah.
it to street level for anyone who doesn't even know what that means, what are we talking about?
So I think like keeping with the metaphor, you want to open the hood, right?
Hmm.
And like look at what's there. So what is happening for you and what feels out of norm? Like if you where's the distress coming up? What's the
Right.
symptom and how is it showing up in your body? Because there's lots of different ways to attack these symptoms. Because one of the things, I wish we taught this like in elementary school, but we actually have a lot more control over the functioning of the nervous system than we think we do, especially when it comes to the symptoms of trauma. So if we, instead of like noticing the symptoms and trying to shove them away, if we actually looked at them and figured out what they were causing, then we could figure out how to walk them back. And so we can look at an example, but basically you want to work on two levels. You want to work on the cognitive level to process whatever didn't get processed to begin with. And then you want to work on the nervous system body level so that you learn
Hmm.
how to be like an embodied thing in the world in a way that feels safe again.
So trauma isn't just investigating your cognition, or I'm going to outthink this, or I'm going to figure this out thing. Trauma is a mind
Mhm.
body, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the whole field of psychology thought for a long time that all you needed to do is work cognitively. All you
Right.
need to do is figure out what's going on in your mind. And then
Yeah.
the body symptoms were just an extension of that. They'll just go away. but now we understand that the brain is connected, in fact, to the body. And so there are imprints from the trauma on the body as well. So those have to be worked out as well.
Do you see
So
what's coming in the distance? It's growing bigger and bigger. Do you see what's coming? It has two
no.
wheels. My motorcycle story.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. I feel it. What we opened with, because when you said drop into your body, that
Yeah.
it was an example of that. So,
Yeah. You want to tell the motorcycle story?
yes, so I've gone down on my motorcycle 3 or 4 times, and luckily have not. I've walked away every time. And this one time, I was at a diner uh, doing some writing. It was dark. It was like 9 or 10 p.m. And I was making a left turn.
Mm.
And as I was making a left, I'm right about to make a left. This car comes, swerves, and nicks my front tire. And thank God she swerved, because if she didn't swerve, she would hit my legs, and I would definitely probably be in a wheelchair today. But she hit my front tire, and my bike went flying. I went up in the air. The people around me said I went up in the air, did a flip, like a backflip, and landed on my feet, which is how I like to imagine it, very kind of ninja.
Yeah.
But I fell off the bike, and
Can I
of
pause?
course,
What happened to your perception in that moment? What do you
everything slowed down,
Yeah.
slow motion.
Yeah. So that's the sign of overwhelm on your viscera, on your perceptions. Everything just like you just like disconnect from yourself, and you start to feel time
Yes.
shift, which is crazy. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, what's your theory on that? I know Dax Shepard has a theory. Many people have theories on why, when you're in that kind of panic, fight or flight situation, that things like time actually feels like it's slowing down. You
Oh,
know,
we know why.
well, tell us.
Let's get Dax on here. Because so the brain, when it senses danger, it automatically alters function to better prepare you to handle that danger. And so that can look like a whole bunch of different things. Like that might look like so this is fight, flight, or freeze, right? You might
Right.
fight, you might flee, and you might freeze. And we think that our perception of time is like connected to Apple and like the clock, and like we have this innate perception of time. It's one of the things that gets basically like disconnected when we have a whole bunch of stress hormones coursing through the body and the alarm system in the brain going off. Because if you think about like what you might need in an extreme emergency situation where someone is chasing you, you're going to need to like see everything really clearly so that you
Right.
don't running away from a wolf. You need to know like that you need to see all of the things that might trip you so that you're more likely to get away. So your perceptions kick into overdrive, and that pulls energy from other things, which makes it feel like time is slowing, when actually you're just perceiving differently than you do in the normal course of the day, because all of these systems are on.
It almost feels like a superpower. I've experienced it many times in my life, mostly from accidents, where
It is.
it's everything slows down. It's almost like rack focus. You
Yep.
suddenly, it almost feels like you have the power to slow time down. That's what it feels like.
You do. And it is a superpower. This is the main like thing that we get wrong when we talk about trauma, is that we assume that it's a sign of weakness or dysfunction, but it is actually it's a strength response. It's the reason we
Yeah.
survive these things, is that we can have these odd superpowers. Like, when little old ladies like pick up cars.
Yeah, like the mom picking up
Kids.
the log that she can't
Yeah.
lift normally, but because
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what adrenaline and
It's the same stuff. Your body is
yeah,
altering function and pulling energy, electricity, and blood flow away from certain things that aren't needed and putting it all towards things that
that's
are.
amazing. I mean, going back to the analogy, that's the turbo button.
Yes.
That's the turbo's kicking in
Yes.
when you need to pass someone.
Vroom, vroom. Okay, I interrupted your story. Sorry.
That's okay. So the motorcycle. So what I did is I didn't want to leave that event and let it have power over me. I also didn't want to be terrified or panicky every time I made a left turn at night. So
Yeah.
the motorcycle was salvaged, and it was unrideable. So a few weeks later, I got a new one, and then when I was ready, I came back to that same space and the same exact place where I made a left, and I made sure it was nighttime, because nighttime makes it a lot more scary than daytime. And it was right around the same time that it happened. And I made a left, and I went around the
Mhm.
block, and I came back. I made a left again, and I kind of dropped into my body, knowing that now I'm giving myself a corrective experience. I
Mhm.
want to kind of eclipse the old terrifying
Yep.
experience with this new experience. I want to lay new tracks. I want to rewire myself and condition my body and let my body know that I can make a left turn. And every time
Mhm.
I make a left turn at night, I'm not going to get hit by a car. So yeah, I went like 6 circles and did it.
Yeah, yeah. It's that exposure. There's a lot of therapeutic methods that are based on this. And one of them, I think, actually is a form of torture that is a terrible thing, which we can talk about if you want. But um, exposing yourself repeatedly to the thing is a way to desensitize yourself, as long as you're in the right headspace and you're in a safe, place, as you were doing this intentionally. Some people do that without meaning to.
Mm-hmm.
And what they end up doing is repeating the mistake.
Yes.
But
So
what you're doing is trying to like both process what happened in the moment so you can feel some of those emotions, and also give yourself the opposite experience of like, I am safe, I can take a left turn, I can drive my motorcycle at night. Like,
right, if you're not doing it with intention and with awareness, there's
yeah.
also a chance you could just be re-traumatizing yourself,
Oh,
correct?
there's like a guarantee that
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
How would you do a form of this if you've been in relationships that were traumatic? I'm assuming make make better choices and set yourself up for a new love experience where the sky isn't falling and people aren't throwing chairs.
Yeah, I think like it's such an interesting thing. Like, this is one of the things I work with the most with clients, and I also work with couples. And um, you have to go against all of the noise that exists in society about relationships, because so
Mhm.
much of it is, as you talk about all the time, is complete bullshit, right?
Right.
Like, but I think one of the things is that one of the misconceptions is that, okay, I'm going to just go away into a basement and heal my trauma by
Hmm.
myself,
Hmm.
and then I'll be ready to just have a relationship and it won't be a big deal. Relationships are how we heal. So you of course, if you need time to like go be by yourself and sort things out, that's fine. But don't think that you can solve everything and just sort all your issues and then enter a relationship as if nothing bad happened. You have to enter the relationship and be open to that relationship being the opposite experience. So if you felt neglected, or if you felt abused or whatever, you have to be open to the opposite experience of that, which means the relationship is fundamentally likely to feel different from the get-go.
Right.
So like one of the things, I don't think you've talked about this a lot recently, but like you called it like a slow burn
Hmm. Hmm.
in your like the difference between having that like firecracker. I mean,
The
you can
lightning,
explain
the lightning
better.
in the bottle
Yeah.
versus slow burn. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's because I think like we get a lot of the times the lightning in the bottle is actually just uh I don't know.
Dysfunction.
Yeah, I was trying to think of like an interesting metaphor, but it's not coming. But like, yeah, dysfunction. It's madness, and it's disguised up as excitement, and it
Yeah.
isn't.
Or it feels familiar because that's what we're used to,
Right.
and so we mistake that for love. We mistake that
Right.
for, yeah. And that's also why if we're not aware of this, we end up in the same relationships. People always say, "Oh yeah, I'm always in the same relationship," and the only thing changes their faces, and it's because you're chasing after this lightning,
Yeah.
possibly.
Totally. And you're not. And
Does
there's a
this?
lesson that you need to learn there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, because the slow burn can be boring.
Right.
You feel
Right.
boring, right?
Right. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm not attracted or I'm not interested. And it's like, well, is that true? Or do you just feel safe? And that's
Right.
unfamiliar, which is like a little bit heartbreaking. And then I think the other thing in relationships is that we have to be more willing to like come to the table and talk about what we're scared of. So like the number of times a
Yeah.
week I have a conversation that's like, okay, it's okay to need reassurance.
Hmm.
It's just that you want to make sure that you negotiate that with your partner so that they don't start to feel controlled. And
Hmm.
so you can come to the table and say, and no one ever talks about this, and you can say, look, I've gotten cheated on a bunch of times and I'm really trying to have a new kind of relationship, but whenever you pick up your phone at dinner I get really nervous. Like, can we talk about that? Can we make a different
Yes.
plan?
So when you have two people actually willing to show their
Yes.
fears, what they're struggling with, that produces
If
relationship glue.
Completely. And without judgment or shame, like, oh my God, here's my
Right.
baggage. Well, like, no, this past experience made an imprint, And that's because my brain and body are working correctly. And so now I'm afraid of this. So how can you help me not be afraid, right?
Well,
Not the other person's responsibility, but how can we enter into a negotiation where I feel safe so that I don't
right.
just keep having the same experience?
The actual experience of feeling safe while expressing yourself in
Yeah.
itself is,
Yes.
the beginning of this is a new experience for many people.
Oh my God, yeah. And then so be creative, right? So if you feel like you can't sit in front of the person and say it, like figure out how to write it,
Hmm.
open up some kind of channel of communication so that you
Yeah.
can address these things and face them. Because we just don't say, like, the more I work with couples, the more I'm like, fuck, like we lament that 50% of people get divorced, but like that's a celebration. 50% of the people work out. That's shocking to me. Like,
Yeah, based on what you've experienced. Yeah.
bullshit.
What about the cognitive piece? And is this the therapy, trauma
Yeah.
coaching, this kind of stuff?
Yeah. And I
This
think,
is where the processing comes in, no?
yeah, totally. And I think we can actually, I think this doesn't have to only happen in therapy. I think as a culture, we can get better at understanding how to deal with trauma and help each other with this, especially in these kind of like these more like kind of, I don't know what to call them, mundane, traumas that aren't these big, huge things that are really rippling through your life. Um, but basically what you need to do when all those things are in overdrive, like we were talking about, the memory gets coded in your brain completely differently than your regular memory. And
Mm.
so your brain, which is trying to be helpful, will bring up all of the the pieces related to that traumatic memory whenever it sees anything that's reminiscent of that. And so you have to do some work with the memory file before that stops happening in your brain, because your brain will just keep pushing it forward it might be in the form of nightmares or intrusive thoughts or kind of outsized emotional responses to normal things, like whatever. So it's important to look at what's there, and that requires having a full narrative of the event, that has beginning, middle, and end, and closure, which sometimes you have to provide yourself. Um, and then an appropriate emotional reaction. Like that's normal to have with memory. Sometimes I think we have the frame on it that like, I'll know that I'm healed when I don't feel anymore. And that's not how memory works, right? If I start talking to you about the morning my dad died, I'm going to feel sad. That's not because I haven't healed or something is wrong with me. It's because I opened a memory file and there was a story there and there's sadness right next to it. And then when I put that away, then we can move on. And then the third thing that the memory file needs to have is a meaning that is related to appropriately to the rest of your life. So using the example of divorce, a lot of clients, I'm sure you see this as well. All the time I see this, and I've experienced it myself, where like you have a narrative that makes sense, you have some emotional content, but then the tag that you have on the folder is like, I'm a failure. And that needs to sometimes be changed too. So those are the three things: the narrative piece, the emotional content, processing that with a therapist or someone who feels safe, and then reframing whatever meaning. Those things are the things that will kind of sort out the cognitive piece. And that's a really stable, we know that from the 1800s, like that's been a very stable kind of mainstay of trauma healing.
And what prevents people from even getting to this, into any kind of, a processing room, is usually the shame around the trauma. So if you've had trauma in your life, no matter how big or small, usually it's lined with shame, and it's something
Yep.
that you don't want to expose. And by not exposing it, it becomes the shadow cast by your own hand. I feel like the processing, what that does is that makes you actually look under the bed and realize there's no monster there.
Totally. I have a chapter in the book that's about, do you know the concept of referred pain?
No, tell us.
So the body is kind of strange sometimes. Like you'll have pain that shows up somewhere in your body, but that place isn't the source. That's not the problem. The most common place this tends to come up is when you show up at the dentist with a toothache, and actually what's happening is you're having a heart attack.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's like the pain is referred, it's sent somewhere
Right,
else.
right.
And so you go to the dentist and you're like, this is going to be a pain in the ass. I'm going to have a filling. And they're like, you need to go to the emergency room because you don't
Mm,
have a problem with your tooth. There's this underlying thing. And I
yeah.
think what happens with a lot of people is that because we think we know everything about ourselves because we're in our own head,
Hmm.
We miss that a lot of the time the pain is referred. So you come in with a symptom and you're like, I don't know why my relationships always look like this, like the example you were talking about before. And sometimes people are blaming it on the people they're dating. You see this all the time on Instagram.
Right.
Everyone
Right.
on a date is a narcissist. Okay.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
You have wildly bad luck if that is true. But so what's the thing underneath it that's causing you to repeat that
Hmm.
pattern? Which sometimes that happens when people don't have shame. They just don't know where the source of the pain is coming from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I also like this idea that shame is an indicator, that shame is,
Yeah.
can be a black light, things to
Completely.
explore, process, look at.
Yeah, completely.
Tell us three things in your book that you're passionate about, as far as when someone's done reading this book, I want them to take away
Mm.
these three things, and that would make me happy, and that it's out in the world, because if they take away these three things, I feel like I did my job with this book.
This is such a good question. And I'm like, I want to answer it correctly. The first thing is that the trauma response is a biological process.
Mm-hmm.
And calling it wrong is like saying that you're wrong for being hungry. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
If we didn't have hunger, we wouldn't survive. If we didn't
Right.
have the trauma response, we wouldn't survive. So the first thing is the trauma response is a biological response and we need it. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing, which is related to that, is that it is a sign of strength and function,
Mm.
not weakness or disorder.
Yeah,
And
well,
that's not,
let's stop right there, because I love
yeah,
that. I love that.
yeah,
It reminds me of my whole thing. I tell people that every part of your story will be used. And
yes, yeah,
I say that because so many of us want to rip out chapters of our story, whether it's divorce or
yeah,
our parents dying or whatever it is. Because yes, I get it. That there's pain there. There might be shame. There might be regret. Um, but those are important parts of your story, and they will be used. Like, so for me, being a failed screenwriter, wish I could
yeah.
delete that. I wish I could delete my whole years in the club business and all of this stuff. But
Mhm.
those are the things that really have repositioned me and made me grow. And so I love what you're saying. You're saying that the same kind of thing,
Yeah.
with trauma.
Yep, completely. And I think that's a great example because I think like we've all had situations where like with enough time you see how pivotal it is.
Yeah, connecting the
Like so,
dots.
right. So
Yeah,
you're like, okay, I want to erase this. I want to erase this. I want to erase this. And then 10 years later, you're like, oh, if that hadn't happened, this wouldn't have happened. Then this, and I wouldn't, my life wouldn't make sense. Like
yeah. So
it,
trauma being a good thing, which no one has ever said,
well,
right?
it's just
That
you are in because of what happened to you, not in
right,
spite of it, you know?
right, right. Yeah, I
Um,
love that. I like to see our stories as a quilt and not a blanket.
yeah.
All the
Yes.
unique patches.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
trauma response is never wrong. Having trauma is a sign of strength
Hmm.
and not, when it's a sign of strength and order, not weakness and dysfunction. And the third thing is that um, we kind of to your point about the quilt, like the goal of trauma healing is integration, not forgetting,
Right,
not being somehow unblemished, not
right.
going back to the past. And integration is possible,
Hmm.
whatever it is you're dealing with, and however gnarly it seems in the moment is possible. Not always, of course, but much, much more often than we think when we can peel the shame away and actually look at it.
Yeah, I love that, and I think this is why this book is so important. The world needs it. I feel like we need to look at trauma through a new lens, and it's available right now for pre-order. So go
Yes.
grab it. Amazon. It's wide, correct?
It's what?
It's
Yes.
wide. It's
Yep.
wide. Go pick it up. It's called Unbroken by MC McDonald,
Mhm.
Dr. MC McDonald.
Yep.
14 years of studying and working with clients, and all of the hard work that you've done,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
in this book. So,
On the-
what a gift. And thank you for writing it. Thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for being
This
my
would, it's
friend.
funny, like I'm just coming full circle. I'm like, this would not exist if it wasn't for you. And I know you're going to dismiss that and just be like, oh, whatever. But like, if I hadn't met you on Tumblr, none of this would have happened.
Sure, and I don't take credit for that. I really believe that we're all catalysts in each other's
Totally.
lives, and for a reason, and it's bigger than me. You know, I think that that's the beauty of humans is our collisions, you know, and the exchange, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, I love that usually we're wrong about why we met someone. There
Yes.
is mystery there, and there's
1,000%.
magic there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And why
This,
we thought we met someone, usually it's something completely left field and different.
yep. Which is like such a like, I don't know, humbling, beautiful thing. Like,
No, it is a
okay.
beautiful thing, right? And also, it makes you feel safe in that there's something greater happening. It makes you
Yeah.
realize how small we are in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that there's this order sort of like that's revealing itself that
Yeah,
we don't get access to. We just live it, which is kind of
right,
cool.
right. And it also makes us accept things like death,
Yeah.
the
Yes.
unexpected, and all
Yeah.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
can we find you if we want to
Um,
know more?
I'm on Instagram. Um,
Yes. At
it's EMSEY
mhm.
PhD on Instagram. And I have a website, alchemycoaching.life. And yeah, the book is called Unbroken. The trauma response is never wrong. And you can pre-order it now.
MC's a very talented writer. Follow her on social. She has really great reads, and her feed is great. And also go pick up her book. You will
Yes.
learn so much.
Oh, thank you. Yay.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you, and I love us kind of holding hands and doing what we do and touching base, and
Yes.
then I still don't know for sure all the stuff that's going to happen
No,
from our collision. Do you know what I'm saying?
totally.
Like a stone that's kind of like a skipping a lake. I feel
Yeah.
like yeah.
Mhm.
So who knows what else will unfold. So
Yeah. It's
super excited.
exciting.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. Be well.